Hey everybody, welcome back to Econ 1A. If you didn't see my email, then I wouldn't know why you're here. But like I said, I may have been exposed to COVID-19, and so this is another virtual lecture to make up for not being in class. So hopefully this will answer your remaining questions about unemployment. We started on Monday talking about unemployment. We're going to wrap up the slides and our discussion of it today and answer all the questions you could ever have about what the unemployment rate is, what the labor force participation rate is, and what they mean for our economy. So let's get into the slides and see what we've got. All right, let's get into it. So last time we started talking about unemployment. Chapter 10 tells us how unemployment is measured, what the natural rate of unemployment is, why some people are always unemployed, and then the last thing we'll wrap up today is we talk about why some people are always unemployed and unemployment insurance. We'll move into talking about how unions and minimum wage laws affect unemployment. And it's a bummer to not have this conversation with you guys. I'll set it up a discussion if you want to talk about it because we are seeing really interesting, strange things with unemployment and employment right now in the sort of post-COVID recovery. Labor markets are just acting weird. We'll talk a little bit more about that, and then we'll talk about efficiency wages. And efficiency wages are basically just another way that we might see wages be different than what economists expect. So, pardon me. We talked last time about the way labor force statistics are collected. The Bureau of Labor Statistics counts people in three different groups. People who are employed are either paid employees with a job, full-time, part-time, whatever, self-employed, or unpaid workers in a family business. Unemployed people are people who aren't working but are actively looking for work. And that's an important distinction, right, when we started talking about discouraged workers last time. And then everybody else who's neither employed or unemployed is not in the labor force. And so the labor force is everybody who's employed and not employed. And not in the labor force is people who aren't looking for work and don't have a job. We can calculate the unemployment rate by comparing the number of unemployed people to the labor force. So we take all those people who don't have work but want to and are looking for work and divide them by the labor force. That's where we get the unemployment rate. The labor force participation rate is the labor force divided by the adult population. So the unemployment rate tells us what percentage of the population or what percentage of the labor force is unemployed. And then the labor force participation rate tells us what percentage of the adult population is in the labor force. And we talked about this a little bit too, right? That we've seen the labor force participation rate go down for men over time and go up for women. And part of that's because, 50 years ago, women were more likely to not be in the labor force and do unpaid labor at home, right? Be a stay-at-home mom, that kind of thing. And as they move into the labor force, we've seen that labor force participation rate go up. So here, first of all, here's some data going back. We looked at this last time too, right? We looked at the unemployment rate 2013, 2015, 2016, 2018, 2021, the labor force participation rate, and it's all based on these numbers, the number of employed people, unemployed people, and people not in the labor force. And all that's based on adult population, which is generally considered to be age 16 and over. Here's that graph we showed last time with the rising female labor force participation rate, the falling male labor force participation rate. And all that's saying is that it used to be that, men were more likely to be in the labor market than women, and that has changed. And we can go here and look at the current data for that. So we can look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics is always updating the unemployment rate, the unemployment level, the civilian labor force participation rate we can look at. And we looked at some of this stuff last time, and it's really interesting data. So here we have the, this is the labor force participation rate. And we can see this is for the entire adult population, 16 and over. And we can see labor force participation went down a lot in 2020. It's gone back up, but it's still lower than it used to be. But then again, this scale here, it's going from 64 to 60, so it's not a huge drop. It's like 5%, 4%, right? So, cool. That's labor force participation rate. Oops. And then we looked at the unemployment rate and how that's changed since COVID. And we see a huge spike in unemployment in the early 2000s in response to COVID-19. We've seen unemployment go down to pretty, what we'd consider normal levels since then, although the labor market's still behaving weirdly. We also talked about this idea of a natural rate of unemployment. And so what that's basically saying is there's a natural rate of unemployment. There's always going to be some unemployed people. And so we'll have periods of high unemployment in a recession and low unemployment in an economic expansion, but it's all moving around a natural rate of unemployment. Like that. So that would be our natural rate of unemployment, and then the cyclical unemployment is deviations from that natural rate. And this idea of sort of having a natural stasis or a path that's kind of around which we fluctuate as the economy goes through cycles is an idea that comes back more and more throughout the semester, and we'll talk about it more. And so here's the actual data. This looks at the U.S. unemployment rate from 1960 to 2012, and you can see it goes up and down over periods of economic expansion and contraction, right? So here there's a big peak in 1984, 1985. We had a big recession. The economy's in a bad place. People get laid off. There's higher unemployment. The natural rate of unemployment is this sort of trend line that goes through that says, yeah, there are periods of high and low unemployment, but really it's always between like 4 and 7%. That's normal. Okay? Why is there a natural rate of unemployment? Well, part of it is because there are always going to be people looking for a new job. Frictional unemployment, remember, describes the friction associated with trying to find a better fit. So it's going to be short-term unemployment, and it's people just looking for the right match. And so that's the way I like to think of it, is that frictional unemployment is the friction or the movement that comes from trying to get lined up just right with a good fit. Structural unemployment is when there aren't enough jobs for the workers in our situation. So maybe manufacturing jobs, there's just fewer of them, and so you're unemployed for a lot longer. Structural unemployment is something that economists worry about more because the frictional unemployment is kind of a good thing. You're waiting to get a good fit, whereas structural unemployment means there might not be a job for you, and we might have to do something to fix that. Okay? Job search is just this idea that you're going to try and go out and look for a better fitting job, and that can be part of that frictional unemployment. These sectoral shifts, it's like that structural unemployment where we see the composition of the labor market change. So remember the story I told on Monday about sabotage, right? This idea of throwing wooden shoes at looms because you no longer have a job because the loom replaced you. So maybe you used to have a job as a truck driver, and now there's self-driving trucks. That would be a sectoral shift that changes demand for your type of labor. And there are policies that we can have to try and fix that. Things like job training and the Unemployment Development Department, the EDD in California, they do that stuff, right? They don't just give you unemployment insurance, they also do job training and try and help match people with better jobs. And so there are organizations and policies in place where the government can try and help solve those sectoral shifts and reduce that frictional unemployment. So the economy is always changing, and there's always going to be some natural unemployment because we're seeing growth of new jobs, the death of old jobs, and some of that frictional unemployment. So part of a healthy economy is some amount of unemployment. Unemployment insurance is a government program that partially protects workers' incomes when they become unemployed. So basically, you pay into your unemployment insurance account, and then when you're unemployed, the unemployment insurance compensates you some portion of your full wages to provide a safety net to help you look for work. Unemployment insurance is going to tend to increase frictional unemployment because you're being somewhat compensated, right? You're getting some money. So that gives you the time and the freedom to look for the best fit. So it's going to kind of increase the friction, increase that frictional unemployment because you have more time. You have a support system or a safety net that helps you look for that job. People respond to incentives. Unemployment insurance is going to reduce the incentive to get to work. If you have $0, you're going to be more likely to take the first job that comes for you. Unemployment insurance reduces uncertainty over time, and it gives the unemployed people more time to search, which means they're going to have better matches, and that can improve productivity on a larger scale, right? Maybe you should have longer to look so you can get the right job for you and be better at it. There are economists who argue that unemployment insurance creates a disincentive to work. But what we've seen just in the recent months is states that ended unemployment benefits early haven't seen a huge change in their unemployment rate. So there's not the strong evidence that economists expect of that behavior. So if we want to explain structural unemployment, we are going to have to build a model of labor markets. And this might look familiar because we're going to treat it the same way we would treat any other market. So I'm going to go ahead and graph it on my little whiteboard that you will barely be able to see in addition to over here. So we have some labor supply and some labor demand. And basically we can model this like a model of supply and demand where we have the quantity of labor down here. Ooh, that barely fit. And then the price of labor is the wage, right? Your boss pays you a wage, and that's what gets you out of bed and gets you to work. So there is some demand for labor, and those are people who want to hire you. And then the supply of labor is people who want to work. And where the quantity of labor is demanded is equal to the quantity of labor supplied, we have an equilibrium wage and an equilibrium quantity of labor. I'm going to give them little stars. Does that make sense? So supply of labor is you and me and everybody going to work. Demand for labor is jobs hiring us. And then the equilibrium wage is what we agree to be paid. Structural unemployment occurs when there aren't enough jobs to go around, and this can happen when wages are above equilibrium. So if the equilibrium wage is $10, but for some reason I am willing to supply my labor at $15 and nobody wants to hire me at $15, there's fewer jobs for me, that's going to create that structural unemployment, right? The supply of labor, where'd my mouse go? The supply of labor is greater than the demand for labor. There's more people willing to work than there are jobs for them. So there are three main reasons that we see that structural unemployment, that above equilibrium wages. The first one is minimum wage laws. A minimum wage law is a law that says, hey, this is as low as the wage can go. If the minimum wage law is bigger or higher than the equilibrium wage, then we're going to have that structural unemployment. More workers are going to be willing to supply their labor to the market than there is demand or jobs for those workers. Do minimum wage laws cause unemployment? There's actually a lot of debate about this in economics, and there's a lot of questions, and it's not super clear. It's not as clear a mechanism as traditional economics would like you to think. Part of it is because not everybody is subject to minimum wage laws, right? Like doctors don't care what minimum wage is because they make a lot more money than minimum wage. Usually economists like to argue that minimum wage laws only affect young workers or workers just starting out, but we see a lot more labor being subject to that minimum wage, and so I think it becomes a much more interesting question. The second factor that can drive wages up above equilibrium is unions. A union is worker association that is brought together for collective bargaining, and the idea is a worker is just one person and the firm is a big entity. And so by banding together, a lot of workers together can form a union and they can bargain collectively for benefits, wages, working conditions, whatever, and they'll have a better negotiation with the firm than they would if they were on their own. Unions do use their market power to negotiate higher wages for workers. On average, the typical union worker makes about 20% higher, 20% more in terms of wages and benefits than a non-union worker, and so unions do drive up wages. Unions can also keep wages above that equilibrium, and that can lead to that sectoral unemployment. It's really interesting to look at it when we see situations where there are, in the same career, you can have people who are in and out of the union. So like a union plumber versus a non-union plumber and that kind of thing. Unions are debated heavily. A lot of critics will say that unions are basically forming cartels, keeping wages too high, depressing the wages of non-union workers, right, harming non-union workers, and causing unemployment. Advocates say that unions are necessary. You need unions to negotiate with large firms, especially when there's these super mega firms that are hiring and firing hundreds of thousands of people. What is it? Amazon and Walmart both said they're going to hire 150,000 more workers for the holidays, something like that. So when you're dealing with firms on that scale, someone who's a pro-union person would say, well, you need a union to support the workers and help negotiate for workers on behalf of workers with a company that big, with that much hiring power. So there's not one way that economists believe about unions. The last third reason we might see wages be above equilibrium, above that equilibrium level, is what's called efficiency wages. And efficiency wages are a situation where a firm wants to pay you more because it helps them, because you're more productive. And there's a couple of different theories for why this might be. And some of these you might have experienced. Some of these, this is the nice thing about efficiency wages, the thing I like is they're actually pretty logical. So there are four main theories for efficiency wages. The first one, which is most likely in the developed world, is worker health. And the idea here is you pay a worker more, they buy better food, maybe they sleep more, maybe they get access to medical care. But the higher pay leads to better worker health, which means the workers are more productive. So you pay your workers more, they eat better, they come to work with more energy than poorer workers who don't get to eat well. Number two, a little bit more realistic in the developed world, is worker turnover. And here the idea is that hiring new people is expensive. There's training costs, there's hiring costs, it takes time. And so it's more productive for a company to keep the same people than be firing and hiring. And so by offering efficiency wages, you reduce the probability that a person's going to quit and then you have to go out and hire someone new. By paying higher wages, you give workers an incentive to stay put. That reduces that worker turnover and it saves the company money. So a company will want to pay you more just to keep you from leaving. Number three is worker quality. If you pay higher wages than anyone else, you're going to attract the best people. All of the applicants are going to want to come and work for you because you offer the best wages, and that's going to mean you have the highest quality workforce. We see something like that with a lot of the techie modern industries where there's sort of a competition to have the cool work environment or the best benefits or those kinds of things. That's kind of the same thing. The idea is you want to be as attractive as possible so that you attract the best workers. And that's going to make you more productive because you have more productive workers working for you. The last fourth reason we might see people pay efficiency wages, or the last theory of efficiency wages, is worker effort. And this is the idea that basically you might not work the entire time you're at work, right? You might be taking breaks or you might be moving slowly. And the two ways to solve that are that your boss can hound you and track you and nag you to work harder, or they could pay you more. And if they pay you more, you're going to be inclined to work harder because you know if you lose this job, you're going to get fired and have to go make less money somewhere else. So the fourth theory of efficiency wages says if you pay workers more, they're going to work harder because they don't want to lose this good paying job. The worker effort theory depends on how hard it is to find another job, how much higher the wages are than the equilibrium. But the big idea here is if you treat your workers well and pay them more, it's going to be an increase in productivity. It's going to be a productivity booster because it's going to make your workers want to stay and not get fired. Does that make sense? So, above equilibrium wages can be caused by minimum wage laws, unions, and efficiency wages. Under the umbrella of efficiency wages, we could see efficiency wages improve worker health, reduce worker turnover, improve worker quality, or improve worker effort. And all four of those are going to mean that paying people more helps the company because those people are more productive. Cool? Hopefully. All right, let's keep going. Let's see which of the following policies are most likely to reduce frictional unemployment. So what we have here are different government policies. And remember, what we want to do is we want to reduce frictional unemployment. And frictional unemployment is that cost, that unemployment of trying to find the best fit. So A is to eliminate the minimum wage. B is to increase employment insurance. C is to ban unions. And D is to post more resumes on LinkedIn so that employers can find workers. So what about A? Oh, and E is to reduce sectoral shifts or increase sectoral shifts. A, eliminating the minimum wage, is going to reduce that sectoral unemployment, the structural unemployment. It's not going to reduce that frictional unemployment. It's not going to affect frictional unemployment. Banning labor unions is the same thing. If those things are keeping wages above equilibrium, it'll reduce that structural unemployment, but it's not going to help people find a good fit faster. And that's what frictional unemployment is. B, reducing or increasing unemployment insurance benefits, that could actually increase frictional unemployment. Remember that unemployment insurance gives you that safety net that gives you the freedom to keep looking for a new job longer. And the sectoral shifts are also going to increase frictional unemployment. So if the economy is changing a lot more and different jobs are coming and going out of being jobs, right? If lots of technology is meaning that more and more jobs don't exist anymore, that's going to increase the friction of trying to find a good fit. So both of these would increase frictional employment, not reduce it. The answer, the policy that would actually reduce frictional unemployment, is the LinkedIn one, right? Because that's going to make it easier for people to find the job that fits them best. And so that's that kind of matching that would reduce that frictional unemployment and help people find the right fit faster. Does that make sense, hopefully? I hope so. Let me know if it doesn't. So, the natural rate of unemployment includes frictional unemployment, which is the time it takes to find the right job, and it's going to always occur even if there are enough jobs to go around. Structural unemployment also occurs as part of the natural rate of unemployment, and that's going to be when there's not enough jobs because wages are too high for one of those three reasons: the minimum wage laws, labor unions, or efficiency wages. And we might see that happen more or less in different markets. Later on, we'll talk about the rest of unemployment. So there's that natural rate, and then there's that cyclical unemployment that fluctuates around that, and that's going to be a function of how the economy's doing. And we'll talk more about that later. So we have learned that an unemployment rate is just the percentage of people who would like to work who don't have jobs. Unemployment rate and labor participation rate vary for different demographic groups, vary over time. The unemployment rate is not a perfect measure of joblessness, but it is a really useful tool. And the natural rate of unemployment is a normal amount of unemployment around which the actual unemployment rate fluctuates based on those cyclical changes, whether we're in a recession or not. And we can break down the natural rate of unemployment into frictional and structural unemployment. Frictional unemployment is that job search friction. Structural unemployment is when wages are too high. And the wages can be too high because of minimum wage laws, unions, and efficiency wages. And efficiency wages are going to tend to either improve worker health, reduce worker turnover, improve worker ethic, effort, or attract the best workers, and all of those things are going to make the firm more productive, and so that's why firms would pay efficiency wages. Sound good? Whoop. Hopefully.